So I've just mapped out what we'll be looking at today very briefly, but I wanted to highlight that along with the toolkit, I was just going to share two quick intensives for you, just to give you a bit of a taste of the types of processes that you might find you're in need of as a leader of people. One is how to have an authentic conversation. So it's pretty much under the heading of how to deal with conflict, because, you know, surprise, surprise, 90% of conflict evolves from poor conversations or just misguided comments and misunderstandings and things like that. So hopefully that will be of help for you. And then I wanted to commend a performance management framework to you to consider as you lead staff teams or as you're a part of a staff team as well, and look at the benefits of that. And then I just wanted to drill down on what my role is and how I will act as a resource in the first 12 months of this FIEC stroke Vikki arrangement, and then what happens post that 12-month period as well. So that's kind of an overview. I have squeezed in a break there because you might get sick of my voice. I also like to interact in Zoom meetings just to make sure that people are still here, because all I've got on my screen is the slide on one corner and my face on the other, so it's a bit disconcerting. So I'd like to check in and make sure that you're still with me. So don't be shy. Please respond to questions as I ask them, and we'll get through this together. So without any further ado, Dean, let's go to the next slide. So I did just want to give you a bit of background about me. So I'll keep it short. Basically, I became a Christian 26 years ago. And I guess God's plan for me was to serve him through various HR roles within a large corporation. I undertook a psychology degree after becoming a Christian, thinking God wanted me to have a counselling ministry, but it just goes to show, doesn't it? Having completed my degree, I was able to progress through the HR ranks, where I became a senior HR case manager, managing conduct and performance matters relating to employees, and coaching managers to manage employees proactively, to the benefit of all, to the managers as well as those that they were managing. I loved working in a secular environment because I love sharing the gospel, and God gave me so many opportunities to share the gospel with colleagues over the 26 years that I've been in that environment. My love for Christ also shaped the way I approached my work, and that was, I felt that was an opportunity to be a real witness in the secular work environment as well, particularly in relation to, you know, workplace investigations and things like that. But then it turned out that God had another role in mind for me. So one day, you know how God works, an advertisement miraculously appears in my inbox, sent by a minister friend of mine. I read it and I feel like it was drafted for me. So I wanted to be faithful to God. I applied while praying that God would clearly close that door, because I really liked the job that I already had and didn't really want to move. But, well, you don't need to know how that prayer was answered, do you? Because here I am. So that's just a little bit about me anyway. So it's nice to meet you all, and I really look forward to partnering with you in your ministry for however long God will allow that. So next slide, please. Now, this is a question that I think it's really important for me to ask and to answer, and it's probably a question that you may have already asked yourself as well. Intuitively, you may be thinking that this is just extra work for you, but if you're a pastor, establishing good HR practices and protocols will save you time in the long run. Let me assure you of that. If you work for a pastor, then you too will benefit greatly from taking the time to ensure expectations are clear. You know, that you have a job description, that you have a ministry objectives document, that you have a rhythm of talking about how your ministry is tracking and going with some sort of regularity. Because this helps to avoid misunderstanding. And as I alluded to earlier, misunderstanding inevitably results in conflict and then just grief. The best culture of a team is one built around trust and transparency. So we'll look at having difficult conversations shortly to learn a little bit about how to do this well. But for now, this is something that everyone in the team should be seeking and contributing to. And then the final dot point you can see relates to fair work protections. So as employees who fall under fair work, there are certain practices, HR practices and standards that Fair Work will look at to make sure that that employees are being treated well and effectively. And they really look at the HR processes that have been adopted, and they look to make sure that they're procedurally fair, that they're reasonable, that they're not harsh, and that they're justified. But I think the key message for you at FIEC is that you need to adopt it, or that full adoption is important. So no point only some of the FIEC family following the processes. You want to be consistent in this as well. And similarly, you don't want to just follow bits and pieces. You want the whole kind of cohort of HR processes in place. So yeah, let me just place that there for you now to consider. Thanks, Dean. Okay, so how am I going to support you? You'll have, Dean mentioned earlier, a HR Toolkit. So you'll have access to the tools and processes you'll need for every part of the working relationship. And this will be available on the FIEC secure site, which I think Dean will point us to shortly. I've created the toolkit to be really clear. There are instructions on what to do, and then the tools or templates are embedded. So you should have everything there that you need. So ideally, it should be a one-stop shop for you. Now, it is a work in progress. So if I've missed something or something isn't clear, you just need to let me know. You can let me know through Dean if that's easier for you, but please let me know. It's an ongoing piece of work, and we will keep modifying it and updating it to suit our needs. Now, in the first 12 months, I'll just be providing coaching and training, so developing your skills along the way. So that's really important. If you have any specific case-related matters, then you're best to engage Dean in those, and we'll see how we can navigate your specific questions in line with the agreement that we've established. So that's just a reminder. After 12 months, I'll be able to provide that just-in-time support. But for now, I'm aiming to provide little bits of intensive training on different areas, like we'll do shortly in this presentation, throughout next year, just to keep us all polished and up to speed in relation to your HR practices. And I also just wanted to stress that as a HR practitioner, I will maintain confidentiality in relation to individual matters, except where it's not possible under law to do so. So that's just something to be mindful of. So, okay, next slide. Feel free to raise your hand as I talk, your little remote hand, and Dean will let me know that there's a question, and then we can address those questions as you have them. So let's keep this pretty casual, hey? Now we're going to have a look at the toolkit now. If Dean, you could maybe do your magic and. Oh, here it is. That's what it looks like. And each tool, oh, that looks really good. So it's, sorry, I'm a little bit distracted because it looks a little different to the other toolkit that I have for the diocese, but this looks really neat. So you can see there are 8, I want to call them tiles. And there's an introduction. So if you click on the introduction first, Dean, that might just give you just a bit of background on the toolkit. So we won't spend much time in this. So we can go back to the heading now, the tiles. We want to make Dean work for his money this afternoon, so I'm going to really keep him on his toes. You can see in recruitment, so the first tile, like I said, it's an all of employment life cycle, if you like. So even before recruiting, so if you're considering recruitment, you would go into this and work out what you need to do even before you start to advertise for the role. And you'll see here I've included, embedded in the document, are things with the initials CMD. That's the, that is the Centre for Ministry Development group. They work out of Moore College, and they train and consult senior ministers and pastors. So they're a group that it's probably worth noting down as well if you want to get some extra intensive training. But they've given me permission to use some of their documentation as well, because it's really worthwhile documentation. So, so you'll see those documents embedded through there. And then if you just keep scrolling down, Dean, you'll see you've got the interview and selection process. In that you've got the assessment tool, you've got the reference check, interview questions when you're doing your reference checks. There's probably a behavioural event interview type template in there somewhere as well for actually running the interviews. And then there's standards about making the offer, etc. Oh, and the list of everything that you need. There you go. Fantastic. And then as part of that recruitment, you keep going, don't you? And so we've got onboarding and induction and day-to-day. So the onboarding, you can see things to think about before they arrive. And a lot of these you will know anyway, but sometimes there are just common sense things that we're just so busy that we forget. So they're not that common. But in this section, you'll also see that there's a document called a Ministry Objective and Development document. So a MOD doc. Now, this is something that we will talk about further on in the presentation. But I want to commend that as a really critical document as you're developing HR processes and practices and creating what I want to call a performance-based culture. Where people aren't afraid of feedback and things like that. So keep that one at the forefront of your mind. So onboarding is the stuff you need to develop and have people do before they come. Induction is the what to do when people arrive. You know, what needs to happen on day one, what needs to happen in week one, what needs to happen in the first month, things like that. So there'll be paperwork that the bookkeeper may need to have the new member complete. There may be a need for them to meet specific people because of the type of ministry that they're going into. So that's all mapped out down there. Again, probably stuff that you already know, but it's handy to just prompt you in that. Now, day to day, you'll see the ministry objective document probably in there again, as you scroll through that. But this is just, day-to-day activities. What does a one-on-one meeting look like? There's that ministry objective document again. As I said, it's what I really want to push. It's got reference in this line. It's also got reference to the fact that the role description or the job description is the what of the role. So when you're recruiting for someone to fill a particular role, so a children's minister or a youth pastor or whatever it is, that's the what. And then the ministry objective document is the how. So what do you want them to do? You want them to lead youth ministry. How do you want them to do it? You want them to be in local high schools. You want them to be running a youth group on a Friday night. You want them to be organising one camp a year. That's the how. So just being able to separate the two, I think, is really helpful. And then you're having your one-on-one meetings with them to go through the ministry objective document and talk about how the ministry is going in that context. Then quarterly reflection and progression meetings. Sounds better than a quarterly review, if you like. Yeah, there are types of feedback conversations also embedded in there that will help you to shape those conversations specifically. But we will look at that later on. We won't go into managing underperformance or any of the others at this stage, because we're going to dive into underperformance shortly. And we may do some other intensives for the other topics. But that's the toolkit, my friends. And like I said, if there are things that you need that aren't in the toolkit, please let me know. Because like I said, this is ever evolving. So there you go. Any thoughts or observations or comments on that, just to help me to know that you're still with me?
Yeah, Vikki, it's Chris here. You said that it would be really important for FIEC as a whole to take this on board. And so maybe this isn't a question for you, but perhaps more for Al. Is this something we're going to do, and to what extent are we doing it? Like, does it go down to the actual specifics of the language, the document types, etc.? Obviously, the practices matter more, but I'm thinking, yeah, the ministry objective documents for each staff member, etc.
Can I answer that, Vikki?
Yeah, I think that was directed to you, Al.
Okay. Yeah, Chris, this is FIEC providing information and tools for our independent churches to use as they wish. Our pastors, lead pastors and elders and leadership teams. And the I in FIEC is a capital I, so it's really up to you. This is really just us trying to be of service, and Vikki and Sydney Diocese, aka Vikki, very kindly providing. We're piggybacking on so much work that Vikki's done for Sydney, but really it's up to our churches if you'd like to use this. It's nothing's mandatory.
Yeah, cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to get a sense of how much we were needing to align with it, or whether this was seen as tools that we can learn from.
Exactly. Deans also, we've also got another group, the Deans involved with putting together policies on everything from, insurance and privacy and child protection, and they'll be available as templates that our churches can pick up and use. So, but this is just, we're now moving, I think, best practice, that it's up to our churches to decide if they want to go this way, or how much you want to use it. That's how much or how little.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Vikki, can I ask you just, we've got, our churches are in every state and territories except Northern Territory and South Australia. How much does legislation or practice vary across states? Are you able to answer that?
Look, I wouldn't be able to answer it specifically. Suffice to say that there are variations when it comes to state legislation, obviously. So my focus has been New South Wales based when I talk about Fair Work. It's kind of the New South Wales Commission of that, but there are there is federal legislation that is aligned to employment, law and stuff like that as well. So it will depend on the nature of the matter as to whether it's state or federal.
So if it's state-based, you might just need to double check the details in your state.
Yeah. So, and that's why it's good that the agreement also extends to access to STS Legal as well. So we can make sure that we're on key on that as well. And just on to have my input into Chris's question, it's really Fair Work will look at what's happened before a problem, like before, say, an unfair dismissal claim or something like that. And so adopting practices that are robust HR practices will protect the church from from any, adverse action claims or unfair dismissal claims, etc., because you've followed this process and you've I guess provided opportunities for the employee to improve, etc., etc. So there's wisdom in adopting these tools, and if as Al said, if it's something that you wish to adopt. I noticed in my presentation, though, that I've now suggested that we break, but we've only been going for 25 minutes. So is everyone happy to just keep going? We're going to do a bit of a deep dive into conflict and having effective conversations, and then we might break in maybe another half hour or something. How does that sound? Yes?
Good.
Excellent. Oh, deep dive. What is conflict? Okay, now I'm sure there is not one person on the call who has not been involved in some sort of conflict in your life. So we're going to look at that now. This is something we face all the time. It's the result of living in a fallen world, being fallen and sinful ourselves, and working with fallen and sinful people. So it helps to look at conflict and identify some helpful ways to address conflict in a godly and appropriate way. And the thing I want to say is that conflict is not a dirty word. In fact, conflict can be good and healthy if expressed in a godly and respectful way. So I thought it would be good to have a closer look at that. And so the slide now is highlighting that conflict is unavoidable. So not only are we all different with a different hierarchy of values and different desires and fears, but we live in a broken world and our own sinfulness is never far from the surface. We're all blind and self-deceived in some areas. While we want to be judged on our intentions, it's our words and actions, or sometimes inaction, that can cause damage. All this makes communication challenging as both the speaker and the hearer are contributing their perspectives when interpreting a message. So it's unavoidable, it's challenging, but it also provides significant opportunities to grow in Christ-likeness, to bring glory to God in the midst of hard circumstances, and to bear the burdens of others. And then finally, it's untenable if it's not managed well. So conflict managed well can result in strengthened relationships and an increased respect between the parties. And I say that because, I mean, like you, I've been involved in conflict, which, is disagreement, basically. And it's okay to disagree with people. The times I've walked away from that disagreement or that conflict with greater respect for the person that I was engaged in that conflict with, was when they treated me with respect, and they valued my perspective. They didn't agree with it, but they listened to it, and there was this kind of coming together of people who had love and respect for one another whilst disagreeing about something. So I think for me, it was just, I've seen healthy ways of dealing with conflict, and I think it's a really important thing. So whilst various contexts are considered, we'll consider shortly, all call upon you as leaders to approach the situation with Christ-like leadership, humility and grace. And that's when people will grow through these challenging times. So just a few tips. Okay, next slide. Now, again, a lot of, just to let out a HR secret, HR is common sense practice, really. So it's not rocket science. So these quick tips that you're looking at now are just common sense. So don't avoid addressing the issue. If ever you've been in a conflict situation where you've just ignored it in the hope that it will go away, I wonder, did it go away? Because they really do. These sorts of situations will only fester and grow tension in the team or manifest in other ways. So don't avoid it. Self-assess. With humility, consider if and how you may have contributed to the conflict. Be empathetic. Understand the situation from each party's perspective. This will help you see the situation as Christ would, with love for the parties and a heavy heart for their pain. And these matters will be heightened with emotions, so be really mindful of that. A very important one is to lead by example. Because as people either leading ministry teams or in ministry teams, you are leaders within your church, and people are watching to see how you deal with conflict. So provide them with a godly, mature model to apply in their own lives. And seek wise counsel. If you are involved in a conflict and it's just doing your head in, we kind of all know those situations, don't we? Raise any concerns with an elder or you know, a wise confidant to identify the best approach to manage the situation. You know, post 12 months, I'll be able, you can contact me directly and brainstorm. A lot of what I do for the diocese is act as a sounding board for rectors who are in a relational situation with a staff member that they're not quite sure how to manage. And sometimes it's good to just talk things through with somebody who's not in that bubble to help you work through that. So seek that wise counsel. Thanks, Dean. Next slide. We're just going to go through a couple of scenarios now. Now, if you find that you need to manage a conflict between two members, and we could replace the word conflict with disagreement. So conflict sounds quite harsh, but the thing to do is to work out how to facilitate the coming together of the parties. So work out if this is the right approach for them. Speak to somebody to work through the scenario and the strategy in order to address that. And that was that sounding board piece that I was just mentioning. So consider who you can kind of brainstorm how to rectify this situation. You can't run a facilitated discussion if the parties aren't willing to participate. So you would want to have a conversation with them individually and ensure that they're happy to participate. Now, if they don't want to participate, then be sensitive to any hurt that they may be feeling. But also, as a leader, if you're the senior pastor and it's two members in your team, be a little bit firm in your request that they attend the facilitated discussion, because you want to see relationships reconciled. I mean, that's a mandate that we do have from God. So facilitating that environment for them is really important, but they do need to be engaged in that process. So, so be mindful of that. And then facilitate. And the way to do that is to review the document that is in the toolkit called How to Facilitate the Conversation Between Two Parties in Conflict. Now, we've referenced the SDS Secure portal. That's not the portal you go to. You'll go, that's my fault, sorry. You go to the FIEC Secure portal. But the facilitated discussion, it's a 5-page document, 4-page document that just outlines everything you need to do from preparing yourself before the discussion, how to prepare the parties for the discussion, and then what to do and what expectations to set in relation to the running the facilitated discussion. I think it's really important to identify what each party wants to get out of this facilitated discussion and to manage those expectations, because your role when facilitating is not to determine right or wrong or to be an adjudicator of the conflict. It's to really get the parties to talk and to listen. So that's a really key role that you really need to communicate well to your people. And it may be that you decide, given the conflict and your role as their leader, that you might get somebody independent to run that facilitated discussion. Now that's something that I will be able to do once we get into the case management piece of the arrangement. But there will be others who will be able to run that facilitated discussion on your behalf, if that's helpful as well. Now, once the facilitated discussion is finished and everyone, repents and makes up, you need to continue to monitor the situation, to follow through and to ensure that that the parties are, I guess, sticking to the agreements, if any, that they came to in relation to that facilitated discussion. And if they don't reconcile, and it's difficult for the team as a whole because you've got two parties or two team members who aren't really getting on, then your discussion with both of them may be harsher and more prescriptive in the need for them to behave in a certain way as part of a broader team. But it's very hard to talk through what that would look like because situations are very unique and different, and we're all complex as well, aren't we? So continue to monitor. We want to seek reconciliation and make sure that that's embedded to the glory of God. So that's conflict between two members. Now I think the next slide. And again, let me remind you, stop me if you've got a question or even a comment or an experience that you've had when dealing with conflict yourself. But here's a tricky one. If you find yourself in conflict with another staff member. So as I said earlier, it's important to address the matter, and it's important to address it as a priority. As a member of a staff team, you need to demonstrate leadership and maturity in this area because you want others in the team to learn from your example how to deal with conflict well in their day-to-day encounters. So again, you will be watched. If it's staff member and staff member, or if it's leader and staff member in the conflict, this is to you. Address it early and as a priority. And we know the biblical principles, don't we? You know, if you have a problem with a brother, you go to him. But it's the heart attitude when you go to him as well. So seeking that reconciliation and that love for the other person. Another key tip is don't try and guess the reason for the conflict. If you're not certain, it's best to ask the person in a discreet and careful manner. And you may want to do that by saying something like, I felt that we've not been communicating as well as we should be, or as well as we have in the past. I wondered if you were feeling the same way. Can we talk about it? Or I felt that there's been some tension between us. I'm keen to understand if I've done something to upset you, or if there's something else going on that I might be able to help you with. Okay, so you're not stating accusatory kind of comments. You're being, you're applying empathy, compassion, and love for the other person. It's important to avoid putting the person on the spot as well. So be mindful of where you will, have that conversation with them or probe them as to what's going on. Now, if you're a senior pastor speaking to a parishioner or a staff member, just be mindful of the power imbalance here as well. Just be very gentle in your approach. If they admit that there is an issue, then it may be appropriate, if they're not able to explain the issues, or if they're feeling flustered, to organise another time to have a conversation with them, just to explore that. But be gentle, obviously. So that's a few tips on a conflict between yourself and staff members. And there's some practical steps in this. Obviously, as you explore the issues with the staff member, make sure you're moving in a positive direction. You don't want to get stuck in the, yeah, but that's not what I meant. But this is what you did, yeah, but that's not what I meant kind of loop. You want to really move things forward. So there are some general principles to bear in mind as you manage the conversation. Invite the other person to express how they're feeling. You might say, look, this is what it was like for me. What was it like for you? So when we had that disagreement, this is how I felt. How did you feel? Summarize what you've heard the other person say to ensure that you understand them correctly. This is kind of reflective listening or reflective feedback. So this is what it was like for you. And then you summarize what they've said. Or am I hearing you right? You know, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? That's a really powerful technique that reinforces to somebody that you've actually listened to them. So that's a really helpful thing to apply in any context, really. Then propose options to constructively address the issues and seek the other person's input, so it's a combined effort and you both have empowerment in this process. And that may be, you know, saying something like, okay, so how can we do this differently? Let's put our heads together and work out how to not find ourselves in this situation moving forward. Now, if you know the reason for the conflict, make sure that you explore the issues openly and calmly with the staff member. So this will benefit you, it'll benefit the staff member, and it will benefit the team and more generally the parishioners. So you may want to raise the issues using these types of questions. And particularly this is where you may have asked somebody to do something and they haven't done it. You know, I feel that I may not have communicated effectively to you when I asked you to do X. I want to apologize for this. Do you mind if we have a chat about what I've asked you to do? We can then talk about any concerns you may have and anything you think we might be able to do differently. Now, obviously, this is my language, and so it won't feel kind of clunky if I was having that conversation with somebody in my team. You're not me, so you may want to use other words, but you can see the principle behind it. And you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, aren't you? You know, you haven't done what I've asked, so maybe I haven't communicated it clearly. Let's explore if that's the problem, or if there's a problem with what I've asked you to do. Or, you know, heat of the moment situations. I feel that I may have treated you harshly when I said whatever. I want to apologize for the way I acted. Could we meet to revisit our discussion about X and reach a more collaborative position, for example? Or if you feel that somebody has aggrieved you in some way, you may say something like, when you said whatever it was that they said, it made me feel like I was being undermined. It may not have been your intention. I'm wondering what it was like for you. Could we talk through what happened and why it made me or us feel the way we felt? Perhaps we can then identify some opportunities for us both to do things differently in the future. Now, if you're unable to manage the conflict directly, reach out to an elder for guidance and support. He'll be able to counsel you on appropriate steps to take. The key message in this, though, is don't ignore conflict or things like that, because they don't go away. Any thoughts or comments on that, or any experiences where you've been in a conflict and you've dealt with it in a certain way?
Vikki, I have a question. Roy up here.
Yes.
In the earlier one, you said you don't try to seek to solve the conflict between two staff members, but it sounds like that is something you're thinking we are doing. So I'm not quite sure what you meant there.
So as a senior pastor, you may have two staff members, two people in your staff team in conflict, and they may come to you to adjudicate or to resolve the conflict between them. As a senior pastor, you may choose to, you would do your preliminary kind of investigation and understand the conflict. And it may be something that you do need to, the cause of the conflict may be something that you do need to address. But in terms of the facilitated discussion, and bringing the parties together with the idea of getting them to be able to articulate their experience with one another and to reconcile the broken or damaged relationship that often results from conflict. You may not be the best person to run that facilitated discussion because of your, I guess, conflict of interest in that you're their boss. Now, the facilitated discussion is a neutral role anyway, so it may be okay, but there may be situations where you think it might be better for somebody else to run that facilitated discussion. That's all I'm saying, just so that the parties don't feel that their boss is in there listening to what they're going to say and how they're going to engage in this process. It needs to be a safe environment. It needs to be a confidential environment. And it needs to be one where people are free to express their hurt and to hear from the other person, and then to explore ways to heal between each other. And that may be something that's better done by somebody who's completely independent of the whole staff team. That's all I was saying there. The last couple of... Sorry, go on.
The outcome of the facilitated conversation is not necessarily reconciliation, or it is?
It is.
Okay.
It's reconciliation of the relationship,
okay,
not resolving the issue. So the issue might be, what might it be? I only get, the youth ministry gets more promotion than the children's ministry, and that's, your fault, Mr. Youth Minister, because you keep, you're assertive in getting that across, and I feel like, you're undermining my ministry because you're promoting yours all the time. And, so there may be a conflict about that, and the senior pastor may come in and resolve that issue. But there's the underlying relational hurt that needs to be addressed as well, because that can be a hangover of the conflict. So getting those people into a facilitated discussion to get them to express their feelings and their concerns about the relationship and how the experience was for them is a really helpful thing. If there's damage to the relationship, I mean, they both might be happy with how things have been resolved, but if there's invariably damage to a relationship when there's conflict, and we don't want to forget that. So we don't want to deal with the symptom, which is the ministry. Sorry, we don't want to deal with the issue, which is the ministry kind of profiling. We want to deal with the symptom, which is the broken relationship, because that will go into future interactions then as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm not convinced. Talk to me.
You're saying that there's two levels of system thing going into that conversation. One is the relationship. One is the cause of the personal relationship stress.
Yeah.
And which one are you trying to resolve? Are you trying to resolve both, or are you just trying to resolve one?
Well, you're trying to resolve both.
Okay.
But sometimes your way, as a senior pastor, your way of resolving the relational aspect would be to speak to both of your team members and encourage them to go participate in a facilitated discussion, and then arrange for somebody else to run that facilitated discussion.
Okay.
Because of the power imbalance, you'll have your two staff team, your two employees in an environment where they're supposed to be, I guess, wearing their heart on their sleeve in terms of their personal hurt and stuff, and to do that in front of their boss, who has that power over them both, may restrict that process a little bit. Fair enough?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Now we're just going to have a look at this slide about why we need to think about we're kind of moving into performance now, which is the next slide. And sorry, the next, yeah, that's it, creating a performance culture. So the tools in terms of managing those matters of conflict really helps us then to recognize that sometimes there will be conflict in our in managing somebody's performance as well, and not always, particularly if we do it well, and if we are used to having a culture of feedback, you know, so giving and receiving feedback on how things are going, how we're going, all that sort of stuff. So if we go to the next slide. So what do I mean by performance culture? I mean that as leaders, we will be shifting the team culture or the ministry culture to a greater transparency on performance and clearer communication on expectations. Now, there's been a lot of research into workplace culture, and it's found that people want to know explicitly what's expected of them in their roles. They want to be rewarded for doing well and for exceeding expectations. Now, we all know that our reward awaits us in heaven, but as normal, sinful human beings, we still seek confirmation or even affirmation that we're doing a good job from our leaders. It may not be a financial bonus as people receive in the secular world, but it certainly should be something that we celebrate and give God thanks for when He allows our ministry to be working well, and when He's provided us people who are exercising their gifts in such a godly and effective way. So can I put a question out to all of you? How do you currently manage performance? Do you think about the performance of your teams? Do you think your staff teams know exactly what's expected of them? There are a few questions for you. I'm happy to wait.
I'm happy to kick off, Vikki. It's
Okay,
Robin.
thank you.
Maybe it's
Robin.
easier for me because I'm no pastor at all and no paid person at all. I'm just a volunteer person in our church at Lighthouse on the Central Coast.
Nice.
So the way I think we do it, bearing in mind I'm not involved in those sessions, is I think our upfront setting of expectations through job descriptions and the onboarding material is quite sound. So I think that very clearly broad but clearly defined roles, and we achieve it that way. So through that documentation and those early conversations. And then they meet regularly, and I can't tell you how often, but that's very much the standard conversation. How are you going? What are the areas you're struggling with? What's going well?
Yeah,
problem solving type stuff. So it's the key there, I suppose, is that it is done quite regularly. From my understanding, it's weekly, at least fortnightly, so that the conversations are not only happening when there's a problem.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's probably all I have to offer to that
no, that's
discussion.
Really good. Yeah. Yeah. And that last comment, Robin, is really key. You don't want to just be having performance discussions when performance isn't going well. So that's something that I'd like everyone to just keep at the back of their mind for now, because that will come up as well. Okay, that was Robin. Who's next?
I can go next.
Thank you.
We started using the 360 review process.
Yep.
And so we had all the staff do that last year. And then I guess the final meeting was to discuss where things are going well and what concrete steps to address some of the issues that came out of the review process. So that's one big, I guess, high-level one.
Yeah.
I guess most of the time it happens on a week-to-week basis. So we have staff meeting every Monday morning. Mm-hmm. And as we go through the different things that have just come up in the previous week and coming up in the next week, I think everyone knows what everyone's meant to be doing.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
it's a bit hard to hide, really.
Yeah.
So and we have a good team, and everyone's pretty honest.
Yeah, right.
But we do keep up, and people are free to make suggestions in the right way. I guess as senior, I kind of moderate that a little bit, but that doesn't need much moderation. It's usually open.
And so the giving and receiving of feedback is something that your team is used to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
great.
Yeah. I mean, the main feedback is usually on the sermon. Like that's how the first 20, 30 minutes of the staff meeting goes. But everything's up for review, especially if it's a new thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Like an event or once-off, this or that.
Yeah.
And then I meet my staff once a month for the full-timers, and then once every 2 or 3 months, depending on how part-time they are.
Yeah.
And then we follow up on the 360 review issues in those meetups.
Yeah. Great. So there's intentionality there, isn't there? You've got a cycle and a rhythm that seems to work well for you, which is good. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Okay. I won't make you sweat it any longer. So creating a performance culture means you know where the performance line is and what exceeding the line will look like. Your people will also know where the performance line is and what they need to do to exceed the line. And conversely, particularly in ministry, where the line is being exceeded, the conversation may be countercultural. For example, you may need to encourage someone to slow down and rest so they avoid burnout. So having transparency and clear expectations will help all in ministry make wise decisions to help avoid burning out and staying for the long run. So our performance culture has, it's not all about addressing performance issues. It's also about caring for our people and making sure that they're managing their workload in a healthy way and having their breaks when they need them and everything. Okay, next slide. Now, this is just something to put out there. It's not something that may really fit well in a ministry setting, because you have a team of experts, don't you? And they focus on various different roles within the team. But I thought I would just share this with you anyway. And thank you, Jean, for prettying it up. It looks good. So this diagram demonstrates a normal distribution curve where people invariably will sit depending on their level of performance. And it's important, or it's helpful as leaders, to recognise where on the curve your team sit. Does anyone have any ideas why that would be important? Okay, you're a shy bunch in FIEC, aren't you? Let me answer that for you. Often performance is driven through the best people. So the exceptional performers, and you may have that in your team. There may be somebody who has all this energy and this capability and capacity to do stuff, that if something extra comes along, then you give it to them. I think the saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. So more and more work and responsibility are put on the shoulders of a few. And we see it in churches all the time, don't we? We've all heard of the 80-20 rule. So often the result is that those individuals will burn out and or leave ministry. So we want to be able to care for them. So the performance challenge is to boost everyone's performance. And this will require you to take action on those who don't or can't increase their performance. And you'll provide different types of feedback to your staff depending on where they sit in the curve. And we'll look at this a bit more closely in the following slides. But the key behaviours to drive performance are creating that clear line of sight, or that alignment, setting meaningful objectives, ensuring accountability, so the rewards and consequences, and then providing constructive feedback to all your staff. So if you don't have a feedback culture where it goes both ways, then it's something to start to engage with and get used to. So let's just have a look at the next slide. So this is just a definition of what performance feedback is. So it's information exchanged between individuals concerning present or evolving performance problems and associated behaviours, or opportunities to develop greater skills and competencies, or to discuss exceptional performance that is designed to significantly improve results. So that's just a broad definition. And I know that talking about performance improvement may not sit well in a ministry context, because we're not used to thinking about ministry in those terms. But my question to you would be, why aren't we used to thinking of ministry in those terms? Because whatever role we're in, there is an encouragement to perform well in those roles. And, you know, and subsequently there are consequences if we don't perform well. As Christians, we want to manage those poor performance issues compassionately, but we still need to be able to call them out and identify them. That's fair to those who aren't performing well, as well as to others on the team who may be carrying some of the load. Now, we'll go to the next slide. We're actually going to look more closely at performance management now. So hopefully this will be helpful. But as I said, this is just something for me to commend to you and for you to consider and consider the benefits of it as well as we talk. We can talk offline about how to apply this in your context as well, as part of the coaching piece that we can do. So I'd be happy to do that. So we want to be open and honest with each other, don't we? So Christ calls us to be, and we want to please him. We also hate performance discussions, don't we? I mean, I don't like them, and I'm sure you guys don't either. I won't get you to put up your hands if you don't like them. They sometimes feel like a sign of impending doom, don't they? Rather than an opportunity to grow and develop. And I think the reason why they feel like that is because we have those conversations in a really clumsy way. So as leaders, you need to shift the perception of your staff to recognise that feedback is an opportunity rather than a doom or gloom scenario. I know there are some personality types out there who love feedback, but there are also some who shy away from feedback. So working out what your team is like and what your individuals are like, and conforming your communications to their style is really important. So you've got to use feedback to drive performance, not to drive personal agendas. I guess the encouragement is when you're having these performance discussions, it's that you want to build stronger skills, you want to build stronger contributions, you want to build stronger results, and you obviously want to build a stronger church. So you could view feedback as a stewardship, not as a task or a drudgery. And it's also important to note that by driving stronger skills, everyone has the opportunity to build upon and improve. So we're just going to look at the foundation principles governing feedback interactions now. And they are, so there are 4 that I've listed here. Building trust. So when the ministry environment is permeated by a belief that feedback is given to help improve and develop others, when there is confidence that feedback is not meant to harm, when personal honesty and integrity overlay all feedback interactions, and when the feedback provider has earned the right to offer feedback, and by that I mean they've built a strong, supportive, respectful relationship, then performance feedback will dramatically increase in effectiveness and in building up. The next point, speaking with greater candor. So when feedback is delivered with candor, which is that open, honest, frank, direct, truthful type of feedback, so candor and genuineness, trust is strengthened and the value or usefulness of the feedback is increased significantly as well. Then thirdly, when the feedback provider listens intently and thoughtfully to the feedback recipient, he or she is better equipped to help the individual identify development opportunities and capitalize on strength in order to boost performance and produce greater results. Moreover, careful and thoughtful listening allows the feedback provider to calibrate and get a realistic understanding of the issues being discussed. Okay, there is more than a poor capability as a reason for poor performance. There could be other things that you just haven't considered. So you need to listen carefully. And then finally, setting performance expectations. So without a clear view of the goal or objective being pursued, without a clear understanding of expected results, and without unambiguous and meaningful measures, performance feedback will have little useful value. Consequently, setting clear performance expectations up front on every responsibility, on every outreach initiative, and even day-to-day tasks should be a personal best practice for every pastor leading a staff team for all the reasons that we've touched on before. So just some food for thought for you. So we're just going to look at two of the foundation principles now. We're just going to look at speaking with greater candor. And this slide kind of highlights the benefits of that. So feedback conversations that are characterized by honest and open and frank discussions about behaviours and impact, not to mention potential derailers, have a much greater probability of being effective than those that are beset with innuendo and generalizations. Feedback providers must assure that they are constantly seeking to articulate their message with candor. So I've seen in the short time that I've been in this role, I've seen a reluctance to be critical about anyone's performance in their ministry for fear of offending them. Can I just encourage you that it's more loving to highlight clearly and articulately performance issues while they're minor issues than to ignore them and not address them until they become so significant that more serious action needs to be taken. So speaking with greater candor is really important. So a couple of tips in relation to that are to pay attention to the timing and relevance of the message. Waiting too long to provide feedback or discussing matters that the person has little or no control over diminish the effectiveness of the conversation. And you as a feedback provider should keep in mind the perspective of the person receiving the feedback. Factors such as workload and stress levels should be considered when giving candid, constructive performance feedback. There may be some steps that you need to implement prior to addressing the specific performance issue, and it may be reviewing the workload, for example, or it may be having the person take annual leave or a break because they haven't had a break for a long time. So we need to kind of think broadly about these things. So that's speaking with candor. Let's look at one more principle, something that I'm sure we all do really, really well. Listening more effectively. This is an art form, I must stress. It's something that we think we do well, but it's actually something that you need to practice and be intentional about. So when both parties in a performance feedback conversation practice effective listening skills, the probability of a helpful and successful interaction are significantly improved. So pretending to listen or filtering what is said through the lens of our own prejudices or biases, which is called discriminatory listening, should be avoided. And there are some tips to help avoiding that. One tip is to clear your mind of distractions prior to engaging in the feedback conversation. Listen to understand, not to respond. So don't form rebuttals while the other person is still speaking. Keep quiet and silent when appropriate, and don't interrupt. So we really need to get our focus working in this. Paraphrase content. Paraphrase content. So reflect back on the person, facts, events, situations. Summarize frequently and reflect feelings to check for and convey understanding. You know, it sounds like the incident has really upset you and rattled you. You know, when you said this, I heard, you know, that you're really emotional about this or really upset about this. So reflecting that helps somebody to be heard, feel that they've been heard. Ask open-ended clarifying questions. What did you mean when you said X? Or why do you think you feel that way? Or could you elaborate on that? Etc. So that keeps drawing out information to give you more data as well. Display an open and interested body language. Depending on the context, but I think this applies. Demonstrate casual, friendly and engaged facial expressions. You know, making that eye contact, nodding that you've understood, all that sort of stuff. And a very obvious one, avoid engaging in other activities. For example, checking your phone or working on your computer or looking at your watch. You need to be really present in these conversations. So I'm sure there are no surprises there. So the next slide, with that in mind, is just looking at providing different types of performance feedback. And it's really different to know what type of feedback conversation or performance conversation you're going to have to be really able to differentiate performance feedback based on whether the individual falls on the performance curve. So those whose performance is marginal or insufficient will need highly corrective and prescriptive feedback. And you can see on this slide where the arrows are pointed. It's a very old image, but it's been a real kind of reliable friend of mine for ages. So it's really helpful. So those individuals whose performance is solid will need feedback that is more developmental and collaborative in order to help them to continue to improve. And the performance of those people at the far right of the performance curve, the exceptional performance, is most often raised via reinforcing feedback. So recognition and leveraging of key strengths, as well as coaching, which we'll talk about a little later. But let me call this out as well. Even solid and exceptional performers may on occasion need developmental or even corrective feedback in some area of deficiency. And, you know, conversely, marginal and solid performers will need and deserve reinforcing feedback as well. So these are conversations that you need to think in your own mind. What's the objective of this feedback? Is it to bring about improvement, or is it to celebrate what God has done through this person, etc., etc., and prepare your discussions accordingly. And I think the graph that we've got on the slide highlights that really effectively. So I'm just going to look at each of those feedback matters now for you. So we need to think about the purpose of the various feedback. So the purpose of providing corrective feedback is to provide feedback about deficient performance, as we've just talked about. Now, there are some derailers to this type of feedback, and we've gone through those. So there's lack of candor or forthrightness. So not being clear about the seriousness of the performance problem is a derailer. Not being absolutely clear about the expected changes in behaviours. So remember, this is very prescriptive, this type of feedback. So telling people what needs to change and by when is really important. Not having enough examples of the behaviour or the performance issue is another thing that will impact the I guess the significance of these conversations. Focusing on too many issues at one time, so confusing your message. Attempting to put the corrective feedback in between two pieces of positive feedback in order to soften the blow. Now, how often have we done that? It's called the sandwich. You're great at this. I really love the way you preach the sermon on Sunday, but I noticed that you didn't pray the Lord's Prayer, which is something that we agreed to, which is really important and needs to happen. But the way you engage with people at the end is really, really good as well. Now, the message is lost, isn't it? The need to change and correct the delivering of the Lord's Supper or praying the Lord's Prayer has been lost between these two positive pieces of feedback. So avoid the sandwich would be my recommendation. Another thing that will derail your conversation is focusing on the person and not the issue. So you've got to be objective. It's not about the person. Particularly poor performance is not about the person. It's about the task or the objective that isn't being done. And so it's really important to differentiate those as well and care for the person. Asking for change that is out of the person's control or focusing on issues that can't be changed will impact the success of your discussion. Giving feedback when emotions are running high will be unhelpful as well. Allotting insufficient time for feedback conversations is always a trap that you should avoid. And feedback delivered in ways that damage a person's dignity or that don't promote positive and productive working relationships will also derail your conversation. So if you look at the slide, it's kind of all managed there, but your key actions are to be intentional about the meeting, about what you're going to discuss. So you need to prepare for that. It would be unloving to run a conversation like this without putting in the effort to prepare well. So develop the agenda, identify observable data and recent examples. Examples are really important. You need to give the staff member every opportunity to understand fully what the problem is and how they need to correct it. Analyze the situation. When was the last time you provided feedback on this particular issue? How long has this performance issue been around? What's the priority of the issue? Is it a big issue, or is it something that can be managed quite informally? What are the possible causes for the issue? Is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of coaching? Is it something more personal that the staff member may need support and encouragement to work through? So get clear on what results must accrue and what associated actions must change. So you need to really think through what the performance issue is and the steps that the person may need to take in order to improve that. And then think about the setting of the meeting as well as part of your preparation, the privacy of it, the time of it, the timeliness of it, and the emotional atmosphere. Define the current behaviours. So link the feedback to expected results and shared goals and objectives. Give a clear description of the situation or problem that needs to be corrected, and describe the consequences or impact on the individual, on others, and on the team or organisation of the performance issue. that helps somebody really consolidate their concerns and really grasp the ongoing impacts of not meeting that expectation. And it may be, it could be a whole lot of things. I won't try and guess or share an example. Clarify the desired results. So describe the expected future condition in terms of results and actions. Again, this helps a person imagine or have an image of what improvement will look like. And then closing the gap. So defining the specific actions that must be taken, the behaviours that need to be exhibited, and the results that need to be obtained in order to correct the situation or fix the problem. Remember, this is corrective feedback, so it's very prescriptive. Identify how the person will be held accountable for making corrections. So you may need to say to them, look, this is a really pivotal part of your role. We need to get this right. If we don't get it right, I might need to formalise this performance management piece in order to invest more time and energy into this critical aspect of your role. However, if I do formalise performance management, there are disciplinary outcomes associated with that. So we really need to kind of invest as much time and energy now to see this issue improve. And then specify the timing of the corrective actions. You know, I really need to see improvement by this time, or you need to finish this by a certain date. And then develop a performance improvement plan, which may be helpful to kind of map out the steps that you want the person to be taking. And that will all be on the in the toolkit as well. And all this information is outlined in the toolkit as well. All right. So once you've managed somebody's performance informally and you're left with no other choice, a formalised performance management process is important to adopt. So I think that's the next slide, Dean. Yeah. Okay, you can go again. So this is part of the overall performance management framework, where you're having your monthly one-on-ones and any issues are being addressed at the time and all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to just highlight why it's important and then what the objective is, because these are very critical to a performance management piece, particularly formalising performance management. So it's important because a clear, transparent performance management process is fair, loving and biblical. Okay, we're called to build one another up towards love and good deeds. And sometimes in the vocational context, this means managing somebody's ability to perform their work. It also provides the employee or the staff member with an opportunity to improve. For people who come under the Fair Work Act, you can't simply dismiss someone for poor performance if you have no evidence to support the poor performance and the attempts to bring about improvement. There needs to be a demonstrated, I guess, brief of the steps that you've taken to support the employee and to encourage the employee to improve. So no ignoring it and then getting frustrated and saying you're fired. That doesn't fly. Employees don't want to be in a role that they are not thriving in. There's nothing more disconcerting or disheartening than struggling in your role, not through desire, any want of desire because you have a passion for your ministry, but through the simple fact that God has gifted you in other areas. And employers don't want people in roles they are not thriving in. So the main objective, this is really important, the main objective with the performance management process is to help the person improve their performance. Now, one of two things will happen when you run a formal performance management process. The person will either improve or they'll leave. But the goal and the objective is improvement. It's a difficult process because of the stress it creates on the relationship, but it can be done effectively when done in love and under prayer and where a relationship of mutual trust and respect has already been established. This is why it's important to have a performance management process in place for all staff as a part of the team rhythm. Okay. Now, there is a cautionary note that I just wanted to share with you before we go on to the next slide. And that is that allegations of bullying and inappropriate behaviour can become a symptom of this process. And this sometimes causes pastors or leaders to avoid such a process. But there are a number of reasons for people feeling this way. One might be that the person isn't used to having their poor performance called out or managed. I think it's a new thing in the ministry context. Hopefully it will become normalised as time goes on, but it's new, and so it may feel very uncomfortable. The person may feel threatened by the process, not by you, but by the process, and they may become defensive. Maybe there haven't been clear communications or transparent, honest and open discussions about the poor performance from the outset. And so they've been taken by surprise, and now they're in this formal process where they'll either improve or lose their job. So the thing I wanted to just stress is that you can't stop someone raising an allegation of bullying or inappropriate behaviour. But if you follow an open and transparent process, as outlined in the toolkit, then the allegations would be unlikely to be substantiated. But they may be an indication of how the person is feeling and may prompt you to take a step back momentarily to work with the person to ensure their well-being as far as possible, whilst not compromising the message that the performance must improve. Having a person's performance and conduct form part of your regular catch-ups creates a performance culture and encourages our team members to continue to improve. And another, I guess, note of comfort is that reasonable management processes do not constitute bullying. It doesn't mean that somebody will not feel bullied for all the reasons that I've just outlined, but if you're conducting a reasonable management conversation with somebody, then that under the legal definition of bullying, that doesn't apply to bullying, which is another grounds for the allegation to be unsubstantiated, and another motivation for you to ensure that you've got all of your notes of every performance discussion that you've had and all the support that you've provided to help somebody improve their performance. Okay, any questions before I go on to the practicality of how you do it? There may not be. Okay. So obviously you manage performance informally first. Now, this is the cultural shift I was alluding to previously, making performance a natural and regular part of the conversation, normalises it and keeps it at the forefront of everyone's minds. So you need to keep in mind what performance looks like, particularly in ministry. You might decide that someone needs to have 2 one-on-one meetings with parishioners each day, for example, in their role, but they only manage to have 1. But recognising that one good conversation that may have run longer than expected far outweighs meeting the number that you've set as their goal. So bring flexibility into your expectations and have clear objectives so that a person can communicate why the one conversation met the objectives, despite the number of meetings being less than stipulated. And this is where the ministry objective document comes into it. So the ministry, actually, we'll talk about the regularity. So review meetings, even when there isn't a problem. Getting people used to talking about their performance is another cultural shift that is really helpful. It's good to check in and see how people are tracking, whether that's weekly, fortnightly, monthly, or I think, Ben, you talked about every 3 months with your part-timers. So that's really helpful. I'm sure you all meet with your team members regularly to discuss, how things are going generally and to pray with one another. So introducing the ministry objective document, which I've mentioned often, is a great way to incorporate an intentional performance management framework into your already established cycle of meetings. So the ministry objective document discusses or talks, frames what you need to be doing. And so it's a two-way conversation. You've got everything documented, the how of the job. And it's good to talk about that. So the example I provided earlier, where one good conversation was going with a parishioner, but two was set as the objective. You may update your ministry objective document to one or at least one meaningful discussion with the parishioner each day. So the ministry objective document is a living document that is updated between the two parties. It can be changed, it can be varied, unlike the job description, which is fixed. So that's an important thing to remember as well. So the ministry objective document is a worthwhile discussion about the ministry and the performance. Okay. And obviously, where there are problems, you need to highlight these in the regular performance discussions you're having and document the discussions both on the ministry objective document and in your file notes. You need to check progress. And so as time goes on, if there is an improvement after a reasonable time, then you might need to consider formalising the process. And this means, given the discussions you've had already, that formalising the process shouldn't come as a surprise to the person, as you've already been discussing the need to improve under the informal process, and you've already shared with them the consequences of not improving. Remember, two things will happen as a result of formalising the process. There will be sustained improvement or there will be separation. So being clear and communicating this is a loving thing. Remembering the objective is sustained improvement is a loving thing as well. But not telling somebody that their job is on the line if they don't improve is considered by Fair Work as an unfair thing to do and would be a defence in any unfair dismissal claim as well. Now, disciplinary outcomes are attached to this process. And Dean, you may want to jump in here, I'm not sure, but if you don't already have them, consider developing a local performance policy for your parish, so all are clear on how you will manage performance. That will include your commitment to have regular performance discussions in relation to the ministry objective document, what the process is if you formalise the performance management, what the disciplinary outcomes in that respect, what the rights are of the staff member if the matter is formal, things like procedural fairness, having a support person, etc., etc. So yeah, if you haven't already got a local performance policy, then I might work with Dean on developing that, and we'll upload that as an option for you to access if you choose to. You want to increase your meetings with somebody who's under a formal performance management process in order to give them every opportunity to improve. Now, each meeting with them isn't to evaluate how they're going or to review their performance. It's to provide them with coaching and support in order to bring about that performance improvement. You might want to also identify other experts who may be able to help them in the areas they need to improve. It may be a performance issue where they're not managing their time well, so they're missing commitments. And you may have somebody else on your team or somebody else that you know in ministry in another environment who may be able to provide them with some great tips to help them. You would reevaluate their performance progress on a monthly basis. And at the review meeting, you would identify if they've improved, if they've partially improved, or if they've shown no improvement. Again, you would explain the consequences. So if they have improved, then you would want them to sustain that improvement, perhaps for another month under the formal process. If they've partially improved, you might set expectations of maintaining the partial improvement, but the need to increase in other areas. And if there's no improvement, explain the need to demonstrate improvement, provide further coaching and review in 1 month. Now, if there's no improvement after 2 months, you may consider issuing a warning letter advising them that should they show no signs of improvement within, let's say, the next 4 weeks, it may result in their employment position being or position being terminated. Now, it's not saying that it will. It's saying that it might. And the reason why that is important, again, is to be transparent. Nobody wants to walk into a meeting in 4 weeks' time and be told that their job's on the line, or that they're no longer required because they're not performing adequately. So transparency, as difficult as it is to provide in these circumstances, is a really important thing to practice. So yes, we're going to look at tools now. Just to reinforce what I've said already, and again, this is all in the toolkit. Ensure that all your staff have a well-drafted position statement or job description. Remember, I said this is the what of the role. This is what you advertised for. And I've, an example, as I've used before, is, a children's minister with responsibilities for a children's kids club, weekly kids club, for the creche, for primary school scripture, and then for Sunday school programs. This is what you're recruiting for. This is the role you need filled. It's not a person, it's a job. So just remember that. Now ensure each staff member has a ministry objective document, and ensure you meet with them monthly or fortnightly or with some regularity to discuss their progress against the objectives outlined in the ministry objectives document. Now, this is a key document. It captures the how of the role. So, again, using the children's minister example, you may want the children's minister, what you want them to do, and that's run these programs. But the how may be by raising up leaders and develop a program for a weekly kids club, promote and advertise at local school areas and amongst church families. For creche, rather than doing the creche work, raising up a group of volunteers to run the creche ministry on Sunday, providing training, ensuring they all have, I don't know if you have this, but in the Sydney Diocese, we have working with children checks and things like that. You probably do have something like that. And we also have safe ministry training that people are required to do if they're working with children. Another key responsibility or objective may be to develop a roster to cover creche for each term. And then scripture was another key element of the role, but this is how you want them to run scripture, by coordinating the teachers, maybe running one scripture class. So you can see the specifics. This is the what, the how they are to fulfill the role. And then you would review this document as part of your monthly or fortnightly catch-ups. And you might discuss things like needing to include in the ministry objective document an item to run safe ministry training to all children's leaders, or work with youth minister to coordinate, kids and youth camp if they run camps at the same time, for example. So redraft the document, remove items that are no longer relevant in your monthly conversations, add items as they evolve. It's a living document, so don't be afraid to, amend it. The benefits of this document is it shapes your regular catch-ups. It makes sure you're all on the same page in how the children's minister role, for example, is, or the children's pastor is spending their time. It's aligned to your overall ministry strategy, and it also provides any indication of poor performance that you may be able to support or improve before it gets out of hand. So you get an early indication of things. You soon realise that there is no improvement, and you now need to formalise the process. And so there are steps to follow the process. I don't know if there's a slide outlining this. Is there, Dean? Or is that it?
No, there's no more slides.
Okay.
Apart
So
from
I'm not going to go through the steps to manage a formal process are outlined on the toolkit, and it's a HR process that incorporates the aspects of procedural fairness that you will need to follow in order to meet the standards of fair work if somebody is subsequently removed from their role and lodge an unfair dismissal claim, for example. So that is a lot of information for you to take in on this sunny afternoon. And I see it's almost 10 to 4. So you guys have done amazingly well in sitting through 2 hours. Can I just have everyone back and we can open it up for questions or comments just to wrap it up?
So one question, Vikki, is there a set number of formal warnings that you have to give someone before they can be dismissed, I suppose is the word?
Yeah. Look, normally it depends on the local policy. That's why it's important to have a policy. You can issue verbal warnings, you can issue written warnings. You would issue a final written warning, which is that letter that says, if you do not improve in this amount of time, then we may need to consider terminating your employment. So right. It can vary, but it depends on the local policy.
When you say local policy, that's Fair Work Australia rather than what your particular church policy is, or does
No, it's what your particular church policy is.
So you would have a policy document for that rather than have it in someone's job description for letter of offer or something. There'd be a separate policy.
You could rely on the letter of offer, definitely, if it's in the letter of offer about the requirement to perform. But it's really important to communicate what the process is when you're managing performance formally, what the outcomes are, so that's communicated, it's clear, that's part of that transparency piece. So that may form a part of a staff member's, like a catalogue of policies in relation to HR policies for managing the staff team at Church X.
Right. Because I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of churches don't actually do that. They're not sure about the laws around actually telling people they haven't got a job anymore.
Yeah.
And obviously they need Christian compassion, and such and such can't do the job, but boy, if we move him on, he won't have a job. So it just kind of.
Look, I hear that, but that's true for anyone who loses their job due to performance, whether they're in the secular workforce or a ministry context. So I think we need to be good stewards in how we manage our staff and our expectations to progress the gospel. But our compassion and our generosity and our concern for the person can overlay the outcomes. So where in the secular workplace, somebody might leave with 4 weeks pay. We may consider if part of the employment arrangement is accommodation and they've got a family that they need to move, etc., or we would give them months if we could afford it as a church, or even help to reskill them. That may be something, and FIEC may have some, may be able to identify or source some resources to help reskill people who may not be suited to that ministry role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. The few times I've had to, well, for want of a better word, sack someone, the job was killing them and they're killing the job anyway.
Yeah.
And to move them in the bigger picture was such a relief for them.
Yeah.
Or it was going to kill the organisation. That's sort of that, but you still lose sleep over it. Anyway.
And that's been my experience in the rare times that I've assisted a rector in this role to do that. If somebody's not suited in their ministry position, they're overly stressed, they're overly anxious, There are all these other anxieties that come into play. So and that's why transparency is so important, why putting them on notice that their job is on the line is important as well, because then we can work with them to improve their performance. But if they recognize that the role isn't for them, then we can talk about other, helping them find another role that might be better suited to them. We can engage in that as Christians quite effectively, I think. So,
yep.
Yeah. It's really unusual language, isn't it, everyone? Talking about this kind of formal performance management piece, and it's scary. And there are some nuances about a ministry role that you need to factor into this. There is ambiguity, there is that flexibility of the role, but you can identify clear and articulate clear objectives in order to manage things as well and to keep everyone on the same page. Yeah. Any other comments? Do you all want to take yourself off mute and just chat amongst ourselves?
Vikki, it's Robin. I have a question.
Yes.
Again, just as a layperson in church, but based on all that we're saying and that need to sort of set those expectations very clearly up front, and also recognising the difficulties that come if someone isn't really suited to their role, isn't performing for everybody involved. I would love to hear you talk about the value of that probationary period. Is that a law thing, or is it just a thing we do? If push came to shove, does it hold up? And yeah, just interested to hear your views on the value and the messaging around that period. If it does hold up, I could see that might be beneficial.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Robin. That's great. So yes, it does hold up. So a probationary period is incorporated in a letter of offer or in the employment contract. And it can vary in its length, but often the normal probationary period is 6 months. Now that 6-month period gives you enough time to identify whether the role is suited to you, if you're the new person in the role. And it also gives an opportunity for the employer to recognise if you're suited to the role as well. So it's an opportunity for both parties to assess suitability in a period of time. So during that 6-month probation period, it's really important that there are meetings going on and that this ministry objective document is being discussed, and that people have visibility of how the new person is going. And the new person has a real opportunity to engage with the staff team and with the broader ministry context to know whether the job is for them. Now, under a probation period, you don't have access to unfair dismissal because you've been removed during that probation period. So there's no unfair dismissal claims that can be made if you lose your job as a result of that. But having said that, if the person has gone beyond their probation period, and then you start to see the wheels fall off, and it may be, and it happens rarely. So please, people who go into ministry love Jesus and want to serve the Lord, but occasionally you might get somebody who then gets distracted and decides to do other things. And so you see behavioural issues then, or performance issues. Now they would be, if you terminated their employment after following a very robust HR process, they would have access to unfair dismissal, but their tenure is very low, like it's 7 months or 8 months or 10 months. So tenure comes into it when Fair Work assess the unfair dismissal claim. And they'll judge an unfair dismissal claim as to whether it's been harsh, unjust, or unreasonable. So that's what they look at. And it could be any one of those things. But that's probably a topic for another time, and one that we might get SDS Legal to go into more detail about how unfair dismissal claims work. Hopefully we won't have those, because we'll be managing people really well, and they'll be of the same mind as we move through if it's a performance concern that we have. So yeah, good question though. Thank you. Any other questions? No, Well, I encourage you all to socialise with the toolkit and familiarise yourself with that. And can I just say again, I'm really looking forward to supporting you in your ministry. I may come across very pragmatic in my approach as a HR practitioner, but don't take that to mean that I don't have compassion for the people that you're dealing with, and that will always come into how best to manage these things. But I'm of the view that compassion isn't ignoring an issue. We can show compassion in the issue, and we can manage it really effectively. So on the one hand, I'm very pragmatic, but on the other, there's definitely room to show that compassion and that kindness to people. And as Al alluded to, sometimes it's those difficult matters that we need to manage are actually more beneficial for the person that we're managing, because it's for their good and their benefit that we do these things as well. So, and I look forward to hearing from you all when we